And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTKA, online at the Big1050.com. The opening of the early signing period, and I keep asking Ira, and Ira said, I don't know either. Whatever they're signing, those things are coming through. They used to call them national letters of intent. Now they sign agreements that say they're committed. And so their commitment agreements are coming in, and guys are officially in the fold with the University of Michigan. We've already talked to Donovan Johnson, by the way, the running back commitment, one of the running back commitments for the University of Michigan, a 4-star composite guy for the Maize and Blue. And by the way, we're going to be talking to several more later on today. We're going to talk to Shamari Earls on this show, but we have a special signing day show later on today, the New Blue Signing Day show presented by Champion Circle. That's going to be on our streaming platforms, the Michigan Insider streaming platforms on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm going to be hosting that from 2 until 5. We're going to have Sharon Moore, several members of the staff, several members of Champion Circle, and several members of the class. So be sure to tune into that, and then we'll replay several of those interviews here on WTKA in the coming days. So be sure to tune in again later today on our socials from 2 to 5. All right. But right now, pleased to be joined by one of the best guys in all the land when it comes to covering recruiting. He is our East Coast guy, our Eastern region guy on 24/7 Sports, a national recruiting analyst, and my man, Brian Dohn. Brian, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Sammy. And I'm just going to say this for the folks out there. A, I wish I could work half as hard as Sam does because he seems to never stop. And B, Sam, before next signing day, I need you to teach me to say Michigan like you say Michigan. I say it Michigan, you say Michigan. And I need to learn that because that sounds so much better.
Hey man, it's you gotta put the emphasis on it.
That's what I need teaching. Hey, when we're back here next year, because this is my annual spot, I expect to be able to say, Sam, I'm here to talk about Michigan football.
I hear that. All right, so let's talk about the guys that we know are already that are signing today. Well, I'm positioning. I'm putting it that way because there is one member that is going to be waiting a little bit to, let out what's going to
public.
Right. So we'll see. But let's start off talking about a young man that is going to be following you here on the show this morning. And that is the young man from Chester, Virginia, Thomas Dale High School, Shamari Earls, the number 67 player in the country, the number 9 corner, and a dude who I think is just scratching the surface of what he can be, and that's Shamari Earls. And so, Brian, I think this dude is going to be an absolute freak show at the next level.
Listen, I agree with you. I think athletically, he is elite. You know, he's got length. He has great ball skills. He is a kid that easily can go under the radar because he committed to South Carolina really early. Obviously, Michigan flipped him, which is why we're talking about him here. But, you know, he comes from a school, Thomas Dale, that does produce kids. It's not like it's not like it's off the beaten path. But where he is, he just, for whatever reason, he wasn't going to go out and do a bunch of camps. He's not a big interview guy. He didn't make a ton of visits. It was at one point I thought maybe he would land at A&M before South Carolina, but I agree with you. I mean, and talking to his coach, who's been there forever and does a great job, Kevin Tucker, you just look at Shamari, at what he does in terms of he can play press, he can sit back a little bit, he can turn and run with a receiver, he has size. Listen, there's a reason we have him as a top 100 kid, right? But I think what you said about scratching the surface is accurate because, you know, a lot of the rankings are based off, here's your physical traits. This is what you do. This is what, this is how fast you run, how big you are, how long you are, your testing numbers. But he still has a lot to learn with some of the technique. But I obviously love everything about him.
Yeah, I think that nails it. He's just raw.
Yeah.
you can't teach 6'2". And when I talked to him, he was like 210.
Yeah,
He
and the thing, Sam, about when you say teaching raw, I mean that he's raw. Sometimes that's good because sometimes kids that have worked on some technique that maybe isn't what a college coach would teach. Can we put it that way? You first have to break them of the bad habit before you can teach them the right way. And so with him, I think it's just raw. So you do start off with that piece of clay that you just jump into. You don't have to mold the clay you don't have to fix the clay and get it back to a ball. You can just start with it and go. And I think for him, that fits it.
Yeah, and he can run. I mean, he's a legit
Ooh.
10'6" guy,
Yeah, listen.
25 something long jump, super long arms. Like you can't teach that. You can teach technique.
So people always ask, with rankings, how does it what's important? And like I'm glad you mentioned the track time because that's huge because you may be the greatest high school player in the world, but if you're running 11.2 and you want to go play cornerback at Michigan, I mean, that's called scout team.
Right. 100%. So that's going to be he's going to be a guy who can come in and compete for playing time from day one. So
Yes.
really big pickup. First, he's committed to South Carolina, decommits, he visits Michigan. Looks like he's on the verge, but he visits Georgia after that. Georgia gets him. And then because he flips to Georgia from South Carolina, Michigan stays on him. And then they flip him from Georgia. Great job by Lamar Morgan. Right. And so then another track guy, though, because it's like, hey, we got to stay on these track guys. And they get him. And they get him when a lot of folks thought he was going to go to Penn State with his cousin. And I'm talking about Kanoa Winston, another guy who is going to bring track speed on the back end, Brian.
Yeah, and I watched Kanoa play, mid-November, and I watched him as a safety, and I didn't love the fact that they used him a bunch as a running back, so he didn't get to play as a safety as much. They played against good counsel, but you want to talk about a kid who's like a missile coming up to hit people at the line of scrimmage. Now, my one concern with Kanoa is his size, right? He's not a 6-foot kid. He's 5'10", 5'10 and a half, runs great, has a great build, and will just come up and pop you. And he was influential in the run game when I saw him, willing to just stick his shoulder in there and just deliver a big hit. He broke on the ball well on some of the passes. He was Sam, I always look at like DBs and how physical they're going to be. And one of the things I really liked about watching him is he played running back, and he would not go down on first contact easy. He fought for every yard, and his ability on offense was one of the reasons that Gonzaga was able to stay in that game. And I think when you look at his speed and his ability to play safety and get outside of the numbers, boy, I think it's there. And I think, I always wonder about some of the guys that aren't huge, what their mentality is in run support, and he has it. Like, listen, one thing about the Big Ten and the SEC that you notice, or at least I notice, is just how physical it is compared to some of the other leagues. I mean, it is. And I always bring this up, like, everybody knows Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, whatever. But like Illinois is physical, Northwest, everybody's physical in the league. And so you have to have a safety like that who's willing to come up and do that stuff. And, if you're Michigan, you have to have that safety that's going to come up and hit Nick Singleton at Penn State or Travion Henderson at Ohio State. You need that, and this kid will do it, and he'll have success doing it.
Yeah, man, he's super smart too.
Oh,
hey,
you got
to go right. You got to be smart to go to Gonzaga, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's always fun when I talk to kids like that. Like, I don't pretend to be smart, but it really, when you talk to kids like that, you're like, oh man. He's like 18 and he's already so much smarter than me. It's like, oh man, kind of disappointing.
Yeah, you got to be smart to go to Gonzaga, and he can really, really run.
Yep,
and they'll hit you.
Yep,
right. So,
and I think, and you mentioned Penn State, with his brother, his cousin or KJ, and there was a lot of talk that they would go to school together. But I did some talking to some people throughout the process, and then maybe in the last month, and I don't know if it was a deal where they wanted to play together. Um, and I think when Penn State showed Kanoa around, um, there was the feeling of, well, KJ's here. And I don't think that helped Penn State. And then I think Michigan just did an awesome job. And Penn State kept trying to come back to him all fall. And Kanoa kept saying, no, I'm good.
Yeah, that was, I think, something that he kept saying wasn't going to be a factor, and people didn't really buy it.
I didn't until I really started hearing some stuff throughout the late summer and fall.
Yeah. Yeah, he kind of had to show you, like, listen, I'm serious.
Yeah.
That's not really guiding my recruitment. And he proved it that wasn't the case, right? So
yeah, I mean, listen, it's not like he made a bad choice. I mean, he's going to Michigan for goodness sake.
right. Right. So yeah, so he didn't have to flip. Lamar didn't have to flip Kanoa Winston.
No.
But he did have to ignore that talk that he was leaning to Penn State, right?
He had to believe that he could get him.
Mm-hmm.
Not just recruit him because you had to recruit him, but believe you could get him.
Right. And so this is kind of like a theme. He had to believe he could flip Shamari Earls from Georgia. He had to believe that he could flip the next guy that I'm going to talk about, Jordan Young from Clemson, who he had recruited all the way from the start. Like he was on Kanoa Winston and Shamari. These guys were like the guys he identified from day one. Kanoa Winston, Jordan Young, Shamari Earls. And it felt like with Jordan Young, it came down to distance at the end, and he picked Clemson. But he stayed on him. And then if it came down to distance, and this is me kind of projecting, but it's like if it's distance, don't let that be the fact. You need to come on. You need to come on here. Don't let that be the reason that you go there. And I think ultimately the kid agreed and wound up flipping and coming to Michigan. And he flipped to Michigan a couple of days ago. And that gives them another guy with great range on the back end that can really run a whole lot of versatility out of Monroe, North Carolina.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, when you look at him flipping, going to Michigan, not let distance be a factor, I think what's easy to overlook, and I think what a lot of fans are still trying to get their head around and understand is the distance thing, while it is a factor, it is not nearly the same because, listen, these kids are getting paid. Yep. And part of a lot of the agreements from schools is if you're out of the area, they're paying for your family to get to games now. And listen, you still have to, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, with Andrew Olish, who's got to go, hit one of the things with with Oregon, with Andrew is, look, they can pay to get the family out there, but you still got to go to the airport. You still got to fly. You still got to get a rental car. Same with Jordan with his family getting up to Ann Arbor. But it now just becomes a time thing and not a financial restraint. And I think that's important to note. Now, I think also Michigan's NIL is a lot better than Clemson's. And when you're talking about players of this level, that becomes a factor. I mean, I think you guys may have gotten a quarterback who may have had some. I may have read a thing or two about NIL being involved. I'm not sure. But aside from all that, you still have to have the kid connect with the coaching staff. He has to be good enough to play at Michigan. And in getting to your question, I think, yeah, he is. I mean, he is sensational. He drives on the ball. He runs well. You watch some of his clips, and he'll be playing that deep free safety spot, and bam, he's getting to the ball carrier wide at the line of scrimmage for no gain, maybe a 1-yard gain. He'll hit you. He can change direction. I love his instincts in the passing game. He can flip his hips. I think, look, if you're at Michigan, I think you play him at safety. But if you said, hey, okay, let's look at like a mid-power 4 program, I do think he'd be able to play cornerback there. But again, Michigan, you're at a higher level now, right? And so safety, it's a great fit back there. I love his size. I love his length. And it's kind of like very similar with Kanoa. Like he's a really good kid too. And it's always good to add those kids to your room. And I think when you Good.
Yeah, I was just gonna say your description is why I think they really like him at nickel, that he
Yeah.
can go down and he can play over a slot, he can cover
Yeah.
a guy, and bring that kind of versatility where he can he can play some coverage, he can go up and blitz some, he can go back and play the deep middle. He can be that kind of versatile piece on the back end. And if you need him in the pinch to slide out and play corner like a Mikey St. Ristel, he can do that too.
Yeah, and I think, listen, you're always trying to be whatever we want to call it, a 3 down, 4 down player. I mean, everybody goes for it on 4th down now, so you want to be a 4 down player. And he's a kid that you can change your scheme a little bit without changing your personnel, and that's important in certain situations. And look, I just look at the fact of he has all the measurables that we've talked about with whether it was Earls or Winston, but beyond the measurables, he's just a really good football player. And watching his tape, he's instinctual. He reads plays well. There's times where he knows what's coming before the ball snapped, which tells you he does some film work. And listen, the film work you do in high school is nothing like what you do in college, but it's a lot easier to diagnose things in high school. But you still have to put in the work, and he puts in all that work. And I think he's kind of like a gym rat kind of kid who likes that stuff.
Well, Brian, I know it's going to be a long day and full day for you, just like it is for me. I appreciate you making time for me, my brother. This is my guy, Brian Dohn. This is my man. He made time for me. This is my
Hey,
brother out east. So
always,
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
always, Sam. And I'll just say this: Michigan.
There you go. There you go. Appreciate it.
All right, man.
All
I'll
right,
talk to
man. Good talk to you.
you. See ya.
Folks, we gotta get to a break. We'll be back on the other side here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTK online at the Big1050.com.